familiar with the daily ant. Yes, I see the post now.
Yeah. All right.
Just gonna.
All right, folks. Welcome to the live stream. Welcome, Formica fans, to another episode of Formicast Podcast, your source for everything ant keeping. Today we have a live stream brought to you by me in my bedroom, and we have a special guest today. But before I bring up the special guest, I would like to shout out the community who is currently watching. But before that, I want to also say happy birthday to Minigun. Today's your birthday. I wanted to wish you a happy birthday. We have no new iTunes reviews. Sadly, get on that, guys. It takes like 2 minutes to set up an account and rate and review the show. You do that, and we will actually rate it up on the show for you. All right, introducing our guest. How's it going, buddy? Introduce yourself.
Hey, good. I'm Benjamin Blanchard. I recently got my PhD at the University of Chicago, and of course I study ants, and that's why I'm on this podcast. I'm actually currently between positions, but it's actually been kind of nice to kind of like reassess things, and also I'm the editor in chief of the website that I founded, the Daily Ant, dailyant.com. And I was on kind of a hiatus as I was pushing to finish my PhD, but it's been fun to be able to get back to posting about various different ant stuff, both silly and serious.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to be joining you guys here.
Yeah, yeah, it's awesome. So we don't actually know each other in real life, but I know his brother from college. So when I posted on Facebook about a couple weeks ago and was like talking about ants and ant keeping, and your brother Jordan was just like, hey, my brother is a myrmecologist in Chicago. You guys should talk. And so here you are. You're on the show. So
that came together.
yeah. So I don't know if you keep ants. I know we kind of talked about that briefly, or if you've tried, right?
Well, yeah. Unfortunately for your listeners, my expertise is more like in ant biology and like and especially evolutionary biology. And I've actually not really kept ants too much. So I think our discussion will be more about kind of like general ant information. But yeah, I did try to keep an ant. Kind of like just like low key, just in like a jar with some dirt. That I found a DL8 queen. It was probably like Campinos Pennsylvanicus or something. I don't actually remember at this point. At the University of Michigan Biological Station.
Nice.
But unfortunately, she died at some point. She did like tunnel into the dirt and everything, but probably it was too dry, and I didn't really do like good research ahead of time. That was when I was a freshman at the University of Michigan, or I just finished my freshman year.
Yeah.
So I did actually have to keep some colonies for my research in South China at the Xishuangbanna Tropical Botanical Garden.
That's awesome.
And we can maybe talk about that a bit more. Actually, I think some of the upcoming questions might be able to segue into discussing that a bit. But I did keep some of those, but that was mostly just in like plastic containers. And so it wasn't. I'm sure that you and your listeners would be very critical of my setup there, because it was just temporary and not for long-term colony keeping.
Right. I've gotten a couple people telling me, you need to make sure you have plenty of cotton in there and it's nice and tight, and like the water's not leaking out. I've had a couple of my queens die, sadly, but rookie mistake, right? But learn over time.
It's more than just a mistake for the ant queens, but
right. But yeah, I have a couple updates for my colonies. So I think it was Friday. Yeah, it was Friday evening. I went to check on my pogos, my harvester ants, and I went to check them out. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I should put. No, here's actually what I did first. So beginning of the week, I ended up putting some honey and some tinfoil in there. And I don't know why they were doing this, but they started taking their seeds and they started putting their seeds in the honey. Just randomly started doing that. And
yeah, there are some species that are known to do that, potentially as like a nutritional supplement to like put things, like into sweet sources, all those sorts of things. It's almost like tool use. But yeah, anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, that's so I don't know. I had no idea like why they did that, so I thought it was interesting. So I was like, I wonder, instead of putting honey in there, if I made some sugar water in another tube and set it up in the mini hearth. So while I was doing that, I realized that the actual like water tube was like halfway, and I was like, oh, maybe I should give them some more water. So I went to take the cap off, and as soon as I did, all the water gushed out inside of the mini hearth. I'm like, shit, no! And I'm like, I'm looking around, and all the ants are like they're like skirting around and they're trying to like get their larva out, and the queen is like running around the other
So sad.
direction, and I'm like, did I just kill my freaking ant colony I just got? But so I was like, crap, maybe I should just, maybe I just let them be and they should be able to survive. So I went to put some more water in the tube because they all gushed out. But as soon as I went to put water in, it gushed out again. And I was like, frick. And I had a couple of
Oh.
them like falling from the ceiling, and I'm like, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm just gonna close it up and I'm gonna cover them with a little uh, towel that I had, and I just left them there for the whole day. And came back the next day and they were fine. None of them
Nice.
were
Yeah,
dead.
I feel like ants generally, and especially like Pagona mirrex, I feel like are pretty robust ants. With
Yeah,
a painful stinger generally too. So.
yeah. I haven't been stung by one, but I was
Oh,
talking
nice.
to a friend, and she was like, "Yeah, I got stung by two red ants," and I don't know what exactly she was talking about. I think it might have been fire
Yeah.
ants,
Yeah,
but
'cause obviously like red ants could be a whole bunch of things.
yeah. But I was like, yeah, I keep ants. I told her I keep ants, but I haven't really like been stung by one yet.
Yeah,
Well, not any
which
that
is
I
good.
keep. Yeah, I mean, I've been stung before. I lived in Brazil for about 6 years, and there's
Oh wow.
some pretty crazy ants down there. Um, but
Yeah, there's all kinds of ants.
oh
I think
yeah,
Brazil has like, I think it's how many? I used to remember how many species. I think it's like over 1,000 species in Brazil, but
yeah, I have no
it's
idea.
quite a lot.
I know I think there's fire ants down there. But then there's some other ones too. I remember
Yeah.
this one ant. It ended up stinging my stepbrother, and he ended up like his leg like fell asleep or something. Like,
Whoa. I'm gonna. Yeah.
yeah,
Was it like allergic reaction maybe or something?
probably, yeah.
Although as editor in chief of the Daily Ant, I always say that you can't judge the many based off the actions of the few. So. We should still love ants, even if there are some like invasives and ones that
Yes,
aren't humans.
of of course. So yeah, Aunt Seb, we got questions, but we're gonna save those until later. So let's not jump to conclusions right away. Um, but
Oh, I didn't.
normally, oh yeah, I still got a couple more updates. So my former Kafuska test tube that I have my queen and the three workers. There's a little bit of fungus, not fungus, mold in there, and one of my other ants, they also have some mold in their test tube. So I should probably best to clean them out, right? Usually, but I don't know. I'll look into that later. But that's pretty much all the updates I have with my ants. I have no ants that died. Thank God, none of them died.
That's
But
good.
yep. Normally, this is when we go into a break. So in the normal actual audio version of this, we'll have a break in between. And then I just realized that I didn't hit record, but that's okay. I'll be able to download it afterwards. And so basically, we got some questions for you. If you look
Cool.
here on the show notes, so questions from our Discord to the Daily Ant. So I guess the first question was, how does excavation work, and why does Prenopolis Imperius do it? I think that's how you say that.
Yeah, I say Prenolepis in Paris, but I remember one of the earliest lessons I learned actually in my biology and incest class. It was Dr. Brian Schulten's. Was that really for pronunciation, the most important thing is just that you're internally consistent, so that you can like remember how to spell the name. But like it's Latin, so like there's even some uncertainties about how you pronounce certain things, and so yeah, I think most people shouldn't care as long as there's understanding within the community what you mean. But
Right.
anyways, yeah. So actually, for some of the questions, I know I saw some in advance, and I had to like do some of my own research even for some of them, because there's just there's like 13,000 species of ants, so it's they do all kinds of behaviors. Oh, that's only 13,000
Right.
we know of.
Yeah.
Actually, it's up to 14,000 now, I think. But anyways, yeah. So the question was about estivation, which is like it's basically like hibernation, except instead of in the winter, it's over like more hot periods or during the summer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a similar kind of idea where like similar to hibernation, the ants will like stock up on food, and then to try to survive during the hot or the warmer months. I think estivation is generally more common, yeah, like in like desert type areas or also in some temperate zone if the species is active during the winter, which is the case with Prenolepis in Paris. So that would kind of answer like why they do it, is because they want to kind of like save their energy through the warmer periods, because they're actually a rare ant that is active during the colder months.
Interesting.
And so it helps, and so kind of similar to honey pot ants, which will have like the pleats that store up food in advance.
Yeah.
The workers will actually do that as well. Although I don't think they do the full amount of like hanging from the ceiling where they have the big full gaster
Yeah.
of food. Like the honey ants, but it's a similar kind of thing where some of the workers will basically like act like a fridge and will store the food during that period. And they're also not like fully asleep or like dormant. They
Yeah.
will still like raise the young and care for the young and stuff and the queen during
Yeah.
this period. They just don't go out and forage.
Huh.
So yeah, that's estimation. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We had spider ants. Don't they do that too? In Australia, they like they hang.
Yes,
Yep. Yep.
yeah. There's kind of like this guy. This kind of behavior seems to have evolved like independently into many different in different lineages.
Yeah. Next question is, how do ants mate once they have thousands, possibly millions of children?
That's a good question. Yeah. So, and maybe anyone who's listening might not know that, queens, when they generally they get mated, or there's one mating event. Sometimes multiple males will mate with the same female, but yeah, and then the queen stores the sperm in like a special sperm organ, sperm keeping organ, and will just release like one sperm at a time to fertilize eggs. And so yeah, so the kind of how they do it is based on they have this like special organ that holds the sperm called the spermatheca, and it's kind of amazing because there are some species like leafcutter ants that can live for like 20 years, or even like 30 years in the lab, I think, if not longer, and they just mate once and then can just have millions of sperm that they just release over the course of their life.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable. I did find a study that, or say some studies actually found that there was apparently some degradation of like the sperm quality as you as time goes on, which is like similar in like human reproduction with both sperm and eggs. That there could be an increase in errors or issues, or just variation that will occur via some like adjustment of the sperm over time. But yeah, so that's it's kind of a remarkable thing with ants that they're able to just mate one time, and then
Sure.
it's kind of sad for the queen because then like the male just dies and then she's alone for her whole life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I kind of brought that up in my last episode, and I know both of us are Christians and we're men of faith, and I'm not
Messianic Jewish in my case.
okay. Yeah. So kind of looking at the fact that God created us not to go off and die, but like God just like spoke to me through that and was just like He created you to be with to be with a queen, to be with a wife, and it's just so cool that God can use something as small as an ant to speak to us. It's really cool. But that has.
I mean, and I suppose in the like in Proverbs too, there's like a couple different verses about it, going to the ant and considering its ways and be wise and stuff.
Yeah.
Although I would argue that there's some kind of interesting things about ants, I would argue that they kind of like don't even have a gender concept basically because the males are so like temporary that they just kind of like die, and maybe we can learn something from that too. But
yeah,
it's a little too edgy maybe for the chat.
But yeah, that'd be cool. We could bring that up a little bit. But I have a really hard time pronouncing a lot of these words, as you could tell. But how do temperate Temnorix species survive the winter?
Temnothorax.
Temnothorax. Okay. Temnothorax species survive the winter in acorns when most ants are deep underground.
Yeah, so I really like this question because it's actually one of the things that's really fun about Temnothorax and some other species is that some ants actually will live inside acorns.
That's interesting.
So the entire colony will be inside one little acorn. Sometimes they can be polydomous and have multiple acorns for the same colony. But they live in like hollowed out acorns. And what's interesting is that I actually kind of wondered when I saw this question, I was like, yeah, I wonder like why they do that. And I looked it up, and there was one study, at least in 2007, by Joan Herbers and Christine Johnson, that documented that survival for a certain Temnothorax species, Temnothorax curvispinus, curvispinosus. So yeah, I have trouble saying them some of those too. Like it was actually quite low. So yeah, many colonies, or at least the workers in the colonies, don't survive because it is sort of this like exposed environment where it's harder to have temperature control or benefit from the warmth of the earth because the acorn's above the ground.
Yeah.
So one of the answers is that actually, in fact, a lot of them don't survive, and then the authors actually say that they don't actually know how the colonies survive the winter overall, and they basically speculate that it could have some antifreeze in their hemolymph. The hemolymph is like blood in ants.
Yeah.
Well, it is blood. Yeah. And and so in some many insects, there are actually, or some insects that live in like areas where there's freezing will actually release like compounds that are like literally antifreeze to keep them from freezing. So they speculate that they almost like have to do that, or is very likely to do that. But as far as I know, it hasn't been documented actually. So that could be something that whoever asked that question could I think it was Minigun, right? Could like study it themselves. If that was a question they wanted to figure out.
Yeah. What parasitic species do you keep, and do you have any ants which do parthenogenesis?
Parthenogenesis. Yeah. So yeah, as I mentioned, unfortunately, and I know this will be disappointing for some, but I don't actually have much experience with keeping ants myself. So the answer to which parasitic species I keep is 0, because I don't keep any ants really.
Right.
But I imagine they would probably be kind of like hard to keep. I mean, I know there's some labs that do research on it, so I know it's possible. But because they rely on parasitizing other colonies by like stealing their young or by like living in their colony, that would be kind of like, I imagine that would be a little bit more complex.
Right.
But then also like parthenogenesis, if you don't know, is the process where a female egg will actually reproduce by itself, just the egg, an unfertilized egg will turn into a viable offspring. It will double and divide. And so there actually are some species of ants that are actually fully like female or at least sometimes reproduce via this method. I think like I looked up, there's a few of them like Cataglyphus cursor, Serapekes byroi, Pristomyrmex pungens, and like a bunch of other ones. Like those 3 are from like different parts of the ant phylogenetic tree. And so it's actually evolved independently many different times. And obviously, one benefit could be that you through parthenogenesis, you don't need to rely on a male on having to go search for a mate and reproduce. You can just reproduce. But then it is a little bit more. There's not as much genetic mixing.
That's interesting. In November, we're going to be doing a 3-part series with mad biologists, and we're going to be talking about different parasitic ants. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I should tune to that so I know more about keeping those ones.
I attempted on keeping some parasitic ants, and I failed horribly. But that was like my first month. So
failure is part of life.
Exactly. What is the most unique ant you've kept? You haven't kept many, you like them because they have interesting behavior or appearance.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, that's why this was the question that was going to be at least a segue for I could talk a little bit about the ants that I study, which are Polyrhacus, the spiny ants. Okay. They're found throughout like tropical and temperate Africa, Asia, and the Pacific Islands, and like down through Australia and stuff. I think the Solomon Islands, I think, are the farthest east they go. I should remember how I have the farthest islands east. But anyways, there's really interesting group that have all these different like spines. And I'm not sure, am I able to share screen or not?
You should be able to. There should be a way to do that. Share screen. Yep.
Let me see if I can do this. Yeah, because I actually prepped just so I can just show a picture. Oh, it's disabled right now.
Is it?
That's fine.
There you go. You should be able to.
They have these spines that are that can extend, that are like longer than or about the length of like their mesosoma, the middle section. So it would be like if you had like a spine that was like sticking out of your back, that was the length of your torso or something. And then they're likely defensive spines. And that was some of what I was doing for my PhD research, was trying to kind of like understand how the spines are associated with various traits like foraging or anti-predator defense or competition. And so as part of that work in China, I did collect a bunch of colonies, and many of them are arboreal, so they live in the trees.
Right.
And so what that means is they actually live between leaves, because they use the their larvae they use the silk from their larvae because they normally would make cocoons.
Yeah.
And they actually use the silk and use it to bind the leaves together. So they're actually a kind of like weaver ant.
Yeah.
They're not the main weaver ant, but it's this group that does a lot of
group,
weaving,
right?
and kind of gluing the leaves together. And so you have this like whole nest that's between leaves and the trees, and so then you can like use scissors and just like collect a whole carton or
that's awesome
leaf structure. And some of them make more kind of complex ones like bees or something where they take stuff and they jam it together and make like a structure in the tree. And then some live in the ground, but I was or in other kinds of habitats, but I was focusing on the arboreal ones. So anyways, so for me, from my keeping of these ants, were just kind of I just collected the structure and just put this natural structure into a plastic box and close the plastic box. So it's like, and I put a little like sugar water, or I think it was a 50%, sugar water, 50% water solution. And it's because I just needed to keep them temporarily to run the trials. It wasn't targeted towards long-term keeping, but because they live in the trees, they're so good at escaping that even like Fluon was unsuccessful at keeping them out. And that might have partially been to do with the humidity as well. Fluon will start to break down with the humidity or become less effective, and the ants just kept going at it. So I think they were adding little like dirt and stuff on it, or just stuff by walking on it or trying to walk on it, that over time they could escape, and it was just remarkable. Also, a fun fact is, so what I did is I for the trials, for these like competition trials, it was like an ant fight club, where I had two different colonies together, and then I had them try to fight for the same food source. In order to do that trial, because that had to be open, the lids had to be open for that, to connect to the center of the food chamber, to kind of mimic like walking on branches in the trees.
Right.
I had to put them inside like a moat with water, this bigger bucket with water, so if they walked outside the box, they wouldn't run away.
Right.
But then some polymeca species actually also swim. So
interesting.
So even the water, some of them can do literally like dog paddle swim, but they'll put their hind legs back and the front legs and do like a swimming, active swimming. So I had to kind of like grab and put them back occasionally during the trials. But
oh man,
I'm
like,
that was kind of a long story about those ants, but
yeah, I'm like trying to imagine them with like how the setup you have, and then like the moat around it, and trying to like imagine them like trying to swim across, and you're trying to like grab them really quick. And,
my gosh, it's like it would probably be funny if someone watching and say, "Yeah, like this is science." Yeah,
science.
It was pretty fun, and man, I spent a lot. My first field season there, actually, both times I went were on National Science Foundation money, and the first time I didn't actually end up using any of the actual data that I did from that first time. It was really just figuring out the system, knowing what the colonies are, and and kind of wrestling with this how to do these trials. And then I did it in a somewhat better way. And then there's still some caveats for even I was able to publish it. But there are still some caveats for I would say for the projects. So I need there's even further ways that can be improved. But.
Yeah, it's awesome. So how do ants react to a mite outbreak within a colony, wild or captive? Are they aware of their presence, or what do they do to stop it?
Yeah, so again, I don't have personal experience with ant keeping, but I do know some about ant nest parasites. And I also looked up some stuff. Oftentimes mites, are really successful, invading because they can mask their scent or the chemical profile to match the colony.
Right.
So then the ants don't recognize them as foreign, and they just think they're domestic. One thing that was kind of interesting, one kind of example of this was a case with Carl Rentmeyer. He passed away in 2009, I think. He found one species of mite, which was I got the name. It was Macrocheles Rentmeyer. I think it was named after him. That actually bites off the tip of the tarsus, like the foot of army ants.
Interesting.
So an army ant worker, it'll bite off the very, very tip of, the tarsus will have multiple segments to it. And it'll bite off the tip, the last one, and then it will bind itself to the foot, and will suck the blood out of the leg. But it actually is positioned so that it replaces that foot segment, so that the ant can still walk fine and is uninterrupted in its walking, which is beneficial for the mite, because the mite doesn't want to wants to survive as long as possible. So it wants to keep the ant alive and functioning.
Yeah.
So it's this wild thing, and it's one of many examples of associations with army ants. There are also a lot of studies have found that mites are actually not harmful for ants. A lot of them are not all of them, but what I read was actually a majority, or at least a large number of them are commensal, so they don't have any negative effect for the ants.
Mhm.
And some of them actually just like hitch a ride, so they're just on the ants just to like go from place A to place B. But it's possible. I could imagine that the stable colonies where you're keeping them in a house, this kind of unnatural environment, may additionally promote like bad mites or like really bad mites that might be able to like explode and harm the ants or something.
Yeah.
But it's possible they're actually mostly just like fine and like innocuous. But don't quote me if you're trying to raise ants, keep ants. I don't know for sure in that scenario if
Yeah.
the mites are more likely to be bad or good.
Yeah.
But from what I can tell, again, I think they generally don't have much of a mite removal process. The ants,
Yeah.
at least from what I looked up and was kind of exploring the literature on it.
Mhm.
But there may be some.
Yeah, I've noticed a couple mites in some of my ants that I've caught, and I've had to let them go because I wasn't sure if it if it would have, because I remember one of my queens that I got, one of my Lasius, and I noticed a mite was on her and she was like really having a hard time walking around.
Hmm.
So I was like, oh shoot, yeah, I should probably just let her go because you never know, she might just end up dying in there. But
Yeah.
yeah, but
I mean,
sadly.
it's probably good to err on the side of caution.
And then let's see. Um, when will I need to move my 4 queen 30 worker colony of Tetramorium immigrants?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't have anything to say for that because I don't know. I unfortunately I don't have experience raising them. Um, although I did notice that this person's name was Isaiah likes Camponotus, and I'm glad that they like Camponotus because Camponotus are cool, the carpenter ants. And
Mm-hmm.
I did actually do a undergraduate study um, through the research experience for undergraduates program with the National Science Foundation on particularly like mysterious group or hard to delineate the species, to separate the species.
Right.
A group of carpenter ants that are found in the Pacific Islands in Australia and Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a Camponotus maculatus group. A lot of them are kind of like bicolored, like have this orange and like a body and black head, or kind of a more uniform color of orange or yellow.
Yeah.
And so like I did some studies on Camponotus, but they're actually really, despite how common they are, they're actually like very hard to study and like identify like species limits and stuff, things that will separate the species. And I found that out the hard way through that project. Really, I had to try to find some morphological physical traits that would separate the species. Because there was one species that we thought was pan Pacific, which was found throughout the whole Pacific, or like almost the whole Pacific, and it actually and it looks like all the workers like look so similar, but then they're actually very distinct phylogenetically. So I use like DNA to determine this, and they and so it's really just a case of extreme convergent evolution where like independently they have evolved very similar morphology and it's like similar structures. So it's it's kind of interesting, but it's a widespread, really diverse, and very annoying group to work on.
I bet. Another question we got was, what are the odds of a new ant species being discovered this year?
Yeah, so the odds of a new ant species being discovered any year is approaches 100% because there's new ant species being discovered every year. In fact, there's already been many species discovered this year. Like one example, I know of one study that was published in July this year by Wiawat Jaitrong and colleagues. Apologies if I mispronounced the name. And he actually described three new they described 3 new species of about 14 3 new species, sorry, in the genus Myopius. And so like I mean like there's just all the time, basically whenever you study a new group you like find new species. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the chat that there was there's about 14,000 species that we know of, but that's just what we know of. And like ants, there's lots of ants that are subterranean, there's lots of ants are high up in the trees or in the intermediate arboreal zone. So it's just like there's just all the time ants. I mean, like new ant species. There were actually several species I found actually in China, in Xishuangbanna, which is probably one of the best studied areas for ants in China. And even there, like just in my group Polyrhacus, without even trying, I found in like a fairly disturbed area, I found several species that are probably new. And if not new, certainly they were species records for China, like the first time they were found in China. So it's like, yeah, like it's very common to find new species, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
It's much different than like mammals or birds, where you don't very often find new species. I mean, in ants we find it or describe like new genera even sometimes. It's more rare, but it does happen. So.
Yeah. One of the questions that was asked earlier today was, how many ants have you pinned?
Oh, how many ants have I pinned? Yeah, and with ants, it's actually often formally called pointing. Although I say pinned a lot more often actually, but it's called pointing because when you prepare ant specimens, you actually put them on this little piece of paper that's called point, as opposed to putting the pin through the ant or through the insect, which is what's done in most other insect groups like beetles and grasshoppers. But anyways, yeah. So, I mean, I started at the University of Michigan with my work on doing like on ants, now a little over 10 years ago. It's wild.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But in freshman year, and it was taxonomic work, and it was a lot of specimen preparation, and like I probably like I would sometimes just pin like 60 ants like just one day. So I mean I probably overall I find thousands. Probably at least like single digit thousands, or like maybe not up to 10,000 yet. But it's been a lot.
Yeah. I've already asked you this question, and I'm gonna ask it again. Have you met Miles?
Oh, you met Miles? Oh, Miles Maxer. Yeah. I have actually not met him. Although we've communicated online, like both of you, like Facebook and email, I think. So I've actually like met him in person. Although it's cool that it seems like he is also like involved with like local politics stuff, or like at his university and stuff. And I think it's cool. Like we need more myrmecologists that are engaged politically too.
Yeah, I hear you. Would you be interested? Here's a question for myself. Would you be interested in joining a panel of ant keepers and fellow professionals to discuss topics brought up by the community?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I guess as I've said multiple times now, I am obviously not an expert in ant keeping, or don't have much experience with that. So if it's specifically focused on ant keeping, I maybe would not be the best person for that. But if they would like to have just like an ants expert, person with a PhD in ants, basically, on the panel, then sure, that'd be fun.
That's cool. So question that was brought up before we started the show today is, what is your experience 1 through 10? I don't know exactly what the question was directed toward.
Do you mean like ants? Because in ant keeping, my experience was like 1, but in terms of ants, I would say my experience is maybe like I don't know if I could say as high as like, I mean, maybe like 8. I don't know. I mean, I can't say 10 because like E.O. Wilson would be like 10 or something, or my advisor Corey Murrow or something like.
Right.
Like I mean, there's just the more you learn. Like I can't believe I've actually in some sense only been doing it for 10 years, but like I know the next 10 I'll learn a bunch more, and there's just tons of stuff I don't know. Like a lot of the facts I've said in the past like 30 minutes. Some of the ones I just like looked, I had like do research to know the answer for. There's just there's so many species and behaviors. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. Another question by me is, what got you into ants? Like, why ants?
Yeah, that's probably one of the single most common question. Maybe tied with how do I get ants out of my kitchen, which I always just say you just have to diagnose the problem, which is that you don't like them. So if you just learn to love them, then like there's no issue. But
right.
Or like study them or something. If you don't like them, you could turn into a science project. But yeah, so it actually started with my my dad, I kind of got interested in insects because my dad found this caterpillar, and I later found it was a banded tussock moth caterpillar on the car at my grandmother's place. And actually, I think that my grandmother and dad might be listening in right now. If they are, hello. It's like near Muskegon, and they're and so this caterpillar has like all these different like hairs, this like black and white like protrusions. And it's just, and so we found 2, so I called one Einstein and one Oreo. Oreo because the black and white, and Einstein because the protruding hair. So I just got really interested. Like you can like hear. I was amazed that if you put like the caterpillar on a leaf and started eating, you could like hear the little clicks and everything. Like
interesting.
Like, and I was just like fascinated by this kind of this micro life. And then when I was at the University of Michigan, there was this undergraduate research opportunity program that was really awesome and definitely instrumental in kind of solidifying my love of ants, where Evan Economo, who's now at the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, does like awesome, like a lot of like macroecological work and some work using CAT scans of ants actually to get like
That's really
3D
cool.
renderings of ants morphology.
Yeah.
But anyways, he had just moved to Michigan for a 3-year postdoc or professorship, and he studies ants, and he had a project in the book for Europe, and so I started doing taxonomic work with him, and then I was kind of off to the races from there because I mean I thought there was only like a red ant and a black ant or something, and it turns out there's like 13,000, 14,000 species.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
It is kind of an unlimited almost amount of diversity in terms of one's life. So
Yeah. Before I ask this last question, if there's any other questions that the people watching have, now is the time to drop them in the comments. And after this last question, we will go ahead and answer those. So I'm going to be that guy, and I'm going to ask the community, or I'm going to ask you, my friend, what do you think about Antscanada?
So I've actually participated in a couple of Antscanada videos because he visits the Field Museum sometimes, and so my advisor Corey Moreau used to be at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, and that was actually one of the things that really appealed. That was kind of the main reason actually why I came to Chicago was because they have an association with the Field Museum, and anyways, so that was my first kind of encounter with him, and I really like his energy and excitement, and it's also kind of unexpected. It's always cool when you study ants that when there's non-formal myrmecologists that really love ants, and also kind of promote awareness about ants in the public.
Right.
But however, I don't have any feelings about it in terms of the actual ant keeping your design or things. Like I've watched some of his videos, but yeah, I kind of have no comment there because I don't know.
Yeah, because I know part of the community, a lot of them like him, a lot of them don't. It's kind of in the middle, and so actually, I think his social media people or somebody on his team actually sent me a message back and said that they're gonna message me back about bringing him on the show. So it's gonna be pretty cool. So hopefully we'll get maybe he'll come on the show. So
he can chat with you. Yeah, I'm sure your viewers will have questions for him then.
I
wouldn't have expected him to be controversial, but I guess you're telling me he is. So
I mean he's the one that got me into it. So I mean it's his fault that I'm an ant keeper now. So
I think that's often true for a lot of people. Like for example, I know this is like a live interview or everything, so maybe it's kind of daring of me to say, but I mean I think sometimes you have mixed feelings about for example some of E.O. Wilson's kind of discussion of what his view of what a scientist should be or how I personally don't really agree with some of what he says about that. Although I think it's kind of a what I would view as sort of dated kind of conception of what it is to be an academic or whatever it is. But he's also has done just extraordinary research, and is has a big impact on the field and everything, and I think that it's both things can be true. And he's also an amazing science communicator. I mean, if I could live to be as influential sharing about ants to non-experts as E.O. Wilson, I'd be pretty happy.
Yeah. So yeah, we did have a couple questions here that was asked in the chat. Let's see.
Exciting because the ones I didn't have you can see in advance either. So.
Yeah, so we got one of them. No, he's not my roommate.
You think that I was your roommate?
Supposedly.
I'm in Chicago.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you are too. I don't know.
No, I'm in Grand Rapids. They're not too far from me though.
I am from Michigan. But...
Yeah. Let's see. Why did ants develop a symbiotic relationship with fungus if they evolved from solitary wasps and they like to eat insects?
Are they referring to the leafcutter ants, like the association? I don't know if they're still listening. If they could add a note, but assuming if they're referring to leafcutter ants, the mutualisms, where leafcutter ants collect leaves and then feed them to fungus and then harvest the food bodies from the fungus. I mean there's some I think. Hard to know exactly how it all evolved. I think that some species that are kind of considered more basal, although that's a loaded term, but kind of more quote unquote primitive or whatever. Fungus farming behavior. It might be facultative, so they don't exclusively rely on it, or they might, if they find fungus, to grow it in their nest. It's kind of like how humans can do agriculture but don't necessarily need to do agriculture to survive. They can have a garden in your house or something. And so it's possible that could be like an intermediate step that allows it to evolve. Because eventually it becomes like obligate, or for some species it's obligate, where like the ants exclusively eat the fungus bodies as their food source, and the fungus exclusively need the ants to make their environment perfect for them to grow in their colonies. So like that would kind of answer that, although I'm not positive that's what that question was addressing, but hopefully I answered it.
Got a question from Joshua Blanchard, and he's basically asking, if you were before the heavenly host and could ask God just one question about ants, what would it be?
So my brother Josh is my older brother. Okay, if I was before the heavenly host and could ask one question about ants, it would probably interesting. I mean, to be honest, it would probably be if it's true that you said evolution, the process, it's like theistic evolution is true, then why has there been so many, which is kind of like what I sort of subscribe to, but why is there so much death? Like ants, there's lots of extinct ants, for example, fossil. There's actually more fossil ants than there are fossils of dinosaurs. That we found.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
That would probably be my question. I think it's okay to still ask challenging questions of God. You see it in scripture all the time. So
yeah. I would probably just ask what other type of wisdom could I learn from them, but that'd probably be my question if I was before him right now. Let's see, and the question is, have you ever been to Canada, and if so, what do you think of the ants that live in Canada? I think that's the question.
Oh yeah, I have been in Canada for a conference in Vancouver, which is you actually just spend time looking at them. I mean, it really is amazing. There's actually even some cool research that you could do, like independent research, just looking at the ants in your house, or trying to kind of experiment with how far they'll go to forage for the food, or what kind of food they like. But I think the ant keeper folks will kind of already be rather ahead of the curve on that front. And so yeah, I mean, I guess I guess just read the Daily Ant. It has all the best media. I can just put my website, but also there's also Ant Web is a cool resource that just has lots of images of ants. Ant Wiki is kind of it's like a pseudo Wikipedia style. I mean, it is Wikipedia kind of structure, but it's there's experts kind of get approved to be able to update it, but it is sort of similar kind of communal information. And so yeah, I mean yeah. And also just tell all the people you know in your life about ants so that people can love them more.
Yeah, exactly. I normally, when I do my research on all the species that I do from episodes, I normally use Ant Wiki for most of my stuff. But
yeah, it's a good resource. I mean, obviously, it can sometimes probably have outdated information, but actually, I think it's really a good resource because it's updated pretty well. So
yeah. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and close this episode, but before that, if you want to go ahead and plug in your social media, if you want to plug in your website, feel free to go ahead and do that.
So yeah, I mean, I already mentioned the Daily Ant, dailyant.com. You can subscribe, like email subscriptions, and also there's a Facebook page, the Daily Ant, and also Twitter at Real Daily Ant, which is kind of spoofing off of the current president's handle. And there's also Instagram actually too, which is Daily Instagram. I was very annoyed. Instagram was already taken. I was very sorry about that. But and then also I have my own personal one, which is at Ben D Blanchard. That's my Twitter account. But yeah. So and then if people have ideas also for posts or anything else, definitely shoot me an email. There's contact us tab where if you have any ideas or just want to share something, I always love. I mean, a lot of the posts ultimately start from someone sending me something. I'm like, oh cool, I'll post about it. So yeah.
Yep. So for those who are listening to the audio version of this, on the video I actually posted the actual webpage. It scrolled up and down so you guys could see what it looks like. But for those who are listening, you can check it out on the video version. I'll leave that up here for people. So what's coming up with the show? We got a couple things. Earlier I had asked you, Benjamin, about the ant keeping panel. So the plan is to get some people, probably get a couple. I'm going to see if I can talk to Miles, see if I can bring him on as well. and bring some other professionals and some ant keepers that have been keeping ants for a while, and basically just see what the community would have, what the community would have to ask, what questions or whatever.
Cool.
Mikey Bustos does know about the show, so hopefully I can get Antscanada on here for an interview very shortly. Still waiting on that.
Cool.
Yep, I'll update everybody else about that. Requirements on that, like, I'm not just gonna have any random person join the show. That's not how it is. It's not really professional. But we got.
I'm glad I make the cut for a random person.
Right.
Random people are underrated.
Right. And then so for October we got I'm doing a episode on Dracula ants, do an episode on zombie ants, and then Minigun actually asked me to do bulldog ants, so I'm going to do that for the last week of this month. I'll do that. There's going to be the next interview I'm going to be doing is a buddy of mine from a Nintendo podcast. His name is Corporal Nosage. He's actually a pest control guy. He does the complete opposite.
Okay, I think I have to leave the chat now. It's the dark side of entomology.
Right. So he actually, like, he's got some actually cool stories of like ant nests and colonies that he's found in like different spots. And
interesting.
So it's gonna be cool to bring him onto the show and just to see his perspective on the ants, his perspective like in general, and like, I don't know, maybe we'll convince him to keep ants instead of killing them. Never know. But
you usually get a bit more money, I think, that route than ant research. But
right. Yeah, I've actually seen a couple different, like, there was one guy that I saw on Reddit. He's actually a pest control guy, and he actually like keeps ants too. So it was pretty cool to see that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, in seriousness, like a lot of times those people actually also, the people who do that work, like also like do have a kind of a fondness or an appreciation for it. I mean, to be honest, I've killed tens of thousands of ants in the course of my research, so really, I'm not one to judge.
Yeah, I mean, I've killed a couple queens on accident and almost drowned a couple. This past weekend. In November, we got a 3-part series with Mad Biologist on parasitic ants, so it's going to be a lot of fun. December, I'm doing winter ants, and I got some more stuff planned out, probably some type of Christmas special, and my birthday is in December, so I'm going to pick one of those weeks to pick a specific species to go over myself. And basically, I just want to thank the Hive gaming community for sponsoring the show, and if anybody out there is listening and is interested in D&D or Dungeons & Dragons game nights, let me know. We're getting a community night to play Dungeons & Dragons, and basically you can find me anywhere where it's Formicast Podcast: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.